is often played out in terms of how Landcare groups were established. One of the keys to Landcare is connecting the social and the biophysical, and the two obviously are linked. And you probably, anyone who's lived in Australia the last 10 years would have heard the now famous quote, "It's hard being green when you're in the red." But farmers saying we can't focus on environmental issues if we're having economic problems. So we're trying to make a dollar. Obviously, environmental issues aren't going to be the first priority. Right around Australia, there was a lot of tree trims in the 30s and 40s during the economic depression then, and there were all kinds of incentives to chop trees down, so people actually paid to do it, or there's tax incentives. So if you're having trouble feeding your family and there's an incentive to knock trees down, it'd be pretty silly not to do it. So there's many examples of past action that have been bad for the environment, and we need not to judge people who did that. It was often government policy or economic circumstances that made that happen. So Landcare's strength is about owning the problem, and there's a real classic example of this. Is again, it's probably a story that's not true, but I keep hearing around Australia about the difference between the bad old days and the current is that people now own the problem. People talk about in the old days, the farmer would phone up the soil conservation guy and say, "There's a cow in your gully, and your fences are broken. Come and fix your fence and get the cow out of your gully." This is what the farmer would tell the soil conservation agency. So the farmers, the landowners, didn't feel responsibility for the land degradation work of something the government came and did for you. Now the story goes that the farmer has built the fence with their own labour. They would have got some government funding, and it's their fence and it's their problem they're dealing with, rather than saying the government should do something about it. So this story is told as an example of how much the thinking has changed, how individual farmers now own that problem. It's not something that the government owns. So I mentioned there's a problem, that you need a problem. So a lot of Landcare groups say the biggest problems area is that we don't have a big problem. So quite ironically, some of the Landcare groups I work with in fairly sustainably farmed areas said we can't get anyone involved, there's no big problems here. And we'd really like a bit of good dry land salinity like they have down at Kerrang or up at Yass, because then people would get motivated. In some cases they're right, there's a ticking time bomb and people just aren't aware of it. So one community I worked in, the groundwater was rising a metre a year, and the local groups were the first to find this out. So a really interesting example of the value of community monitoring, that when the community started to monitor, they found the groundwater had gone from 10 to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6 metres below the surface over a 4-year period. And they went back into the records and found it's been happening for some time. The government officials have been coming and going, and their average length of stay has been less than a year in the government department. So there hadn't been anyone with the continuity to see there was this emerging time bomb about to hit that community. It was only when the local community started to do that water table mapping that they saw there was a problem and got their act together. One of the students a couple of years ago in his essay quoted this famous Buddhist writer about this problem that repetition and habit encourage the mind to be sluggish. A shock is needed to awaken it, which we then call a problem. We try to solve this problem according to well-worn explanations, justifications and condemnations, all of which puts the mind back to sleep again. This is a general human pattern of waiting for this huge problem before we act. One group I did a lot of work with, again we used to take a field trip to, was this place here, Walwa. This is the Upper Murray, beautiful area, and it's about a 3-hour drive from Canberra to go over the mountains. When we went there in the late 90s, there'd been, mid-90s, there'd been a response to some severe storms there in the early 1990s. And what had motivated this group to get together, I found quite interesting, was the local people thought that the government had wasted all the money in a bureaucratic response to those storms. So the stimulus here was what they regarded as wasteful spending by government departments. And the third dot point sums it up, that locals described how they were horrified by the number of people who came throwing money at the problem and not talking to us. This line, not talking to us, is fairly crucial in a lot of the rhetoric and nature of Landcare. Landcare is a call for partnership between government and communities. And this local group was saying that the soil conservation guys came up from Melbourne and from Albury-Wodonga, and they threw all this money at the problem. They didn't talk to us. They didn't understand what the local solutions would be. And I found that quite interesting. So a lot of people think of farmers wasting money on Landcare, but this Landcare group formed for the opposite reason. So partnership is a key concept within the Landcare agenda. And again, this is one thing that I think can be exported to other forms of policy. So partnership is a key tenet of Landcare, and aptly sums up emerging relationships between innovative field-based government staff and Landcare groups. So these staff often find themselves in radically different roles to what they've been trained for. So you guys are 10, 15 years ago, people working in resource management probably weren't having classes on how to facilitate learning. They're probably having more technical training. So a lot of people working as self-conservationists have found it quite a shock to their way of doing things to have to become facilitating to run a workshop and not be the expert who knows everything, going out telling people what to do. So that's been a challenge for some people, and other people are really reveling in those opportunities. Another aspect of the partnership has been the partnerships within the government. There's been a major impediment to partnership between community Landcare and the Landcare bureaucracies, the distrust in rural Australia of the government. Many community Landcare members have a general unease of anything to do with the government. And again, when we ran this field trip down the Murray River, you'd often get quotes like the one there about telling the bastards in Canberra to get their act together. So there's general resentment about the government and the bureaucracy. And sorry, this slide's a bit out of order. Going back to these facilitators, so to be a group facilitator, these new people have to have a different set of skills. They need to have the ability to float ideas and have the humility to stand back and see which of any of those ideas are taken up by Landcare groups. And not all staff are coping with those changes. Some are falling back in I'm the expert, I know what's best, and not giving groups independence to develop a sense of their own ownership and their problems. But other people, as I said, are really, really enjoying the excitement of being a facilitator, learning from communities. I don't know how many of you saw the Four Corners program 2 weeks ago about the global warming and agriculture in Australia, but the woman who featured quite strongly in that was a graduate of this course and a former honours student who now facilitates the Virtue Cropping Group, which is a group in Western Victoria, with a group of farmers working together to address land management issues. So those ready to make these changes tend to fall into two categories. There's recent graduates who have been exposed to models of adult education, and some locals who've always lived in that area. I'm really interested in the role of the local in these communities. So they're often in these towns, there's a person who's worked their way up through the bureaucracy and now is the senior person in the Department of Agriculture or Department of Environment in that area. And it's really interesting to think of the pressures on that person. So often they're seen as a bit lacking ambition because they've never been to Melbourne or Sydney, they haven't gone up the hierarchy. So to get promoted at some stage, you're going to have to leave your local area. And there's problems there because then you lose the local knowledge, the local links. A lot of those people are earning a lot less than they could elsewhere because they're committed to their community. So a real challenge in terms of thinking of career structures for those people. Andrew Campbell, who mentioned a couple of times, published a review of land management in Australia a couple of years ago and talked about the need for building knowledge, or the idea of knowledge brokers, and talked about this cycle in rural Australia of, if we start with the top left box, so needing to have information about situations to raise awareness and motivation, but then having to go out and seek more detailed information to explore and trial new ideas. So it's quite interesting that some really radical and innovative things have been done at the farm level. Every time I go out in rural Australia, I'm amazed just by how innovative and the flexibility of farmers trying things themselves. So there's on-ground research that they're doing. And this often leads to effective action and implementation, but often also there's, at some stage, things might break down in terms of evaluation and assessment. And I don't think individual landholders can do this all themselves. There's a role for government to come in here. And again, Andrew Campbell, he has an article talking about a typology of extension. So extension is this idea of taking information out there. And One form of extension still talks about information access, so it recognises that people require different information at different stages of their learning and decision-making process. And the web is a really good form, a way of getting us across to have flexible information when people need it. There's another form of extension which is focusing still on technological